Hello everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Frank from the City of Games, and it is fantastic to have you guys here. So, what is going to happen tonight? Thank you Flat Out Games for following, I really appreciate it. Tonight is Let's Design a Game Part 1. I'm hoping that this is going to become a regular series, but we're going to see how it goes. So today we're going to start with the absolute basics. Hey Napo, hey Parrot Attack, thank you very much for joining me. So, the first question is, why do you care about designing a game with me? What has this got to do with anything? So, I'm Frank West and I run the City of Games. About 5 years ago, I decided I want to start designing games for a living. I was fed up in my job and I started just having some fun and just designing some stuff. I had no idea what I was doing. I played board games, I played video games, and I really was clueless about how do you actually design a board game? Can I do it? What do you have to do to achieve that? And I discovered very quickly it just requires 3 things. The first thing is a piece of paper. The second thing is a pencil. And the third thing is just an idea. And with that, you can get going. I started back then when I was commuting to Amsterdam for work and I was spending my nights in a hotel, and I just decided to start making this game. And you know what? Now, 5 years later, I've sold over 100,000 games and expansions. I've translated them to multiple countries or languages. I've sold them in over 70 different countries, and I make my living designing games. And it was all because of that pen and paper from back then. Hey Crazy Puff, Flat Out, and Matthew, thank you so much for joining. So, what I want to say really is, it's really simple. You can just get going. So many people are concerned that this is a really difficult process, that how do I begin? And that's what we're going to go through. So, I'm going to jump over to here, and then I'm going to walk you through a few pieces, and then we're going to get started. So, if you'd like to join me over at the table, we will see what we can do. You'll notice that I have a pad of paper and I have a pencil. These are the 2 things that you need as well as an idea. After that, if you want to get really fancy, I recommend taking a rubber and I recommend taking a pencil sharpener, and at that point you are absolutely good to go. When I was kind of getting ready for this, I found this old notebook of mine, and this is something that I used to use a lot for kind of sketching and drawing around. And one of the things that I found in here, which I thought was really interesting, is this. So this here is a character sheet for the City of Kings, which is one of the first game, it is the first game that I designed to release. And this is one of those early sketches. This was something that was maybe a few steps into the process, but you can still see at this point, it was just a piece of paper. It was just a pencil. I've lost my pencil. We are in trouble. But this is where I started. You can see I did my own artwork. I mean, how amazing is this? And from that point on, I started progressing. As I started working with artists and started getting things more evolved, it's still fairly basic. You can see a lot of the similarities between these 2 things. However, you can also see that it's starting to get a bit more refined. There's lots of really simple stuff. These here, I got printed just at a local shop. I went there and said, can you print some stuff for me? And they did. And I started progressing. You'll see here, this is one of the original pieces from the very first colored prototype I had. Now, this was some concept artwork that someone did for me. It's not needed. This is just the color green. In the final game, this was a piece of art, but it didn't matter right here. This is the point, is it's so easy just to start making stuff. What I did here was, as you can see, this is on a slightly thicker board. So as I started to progress more into it, I'd stick the paper to board to give things more durability. This here is really interesting. So this was one of the first sketches of how the City of Kings game was kind of going to look. If you've ever played the game, or if you're familiar with it, you'll recognize the map tiles, you'll recognize the corner piece, you'll recognize the character sheets, the creatures, the NPCs and stuff. You see, these are things that I was just doing and I was playing around with, and I was making this game. And from there, suddenly I had a game which I could release. Of course, there was a lot of steps, but these are really important things that as we start, I just want to share with you. I want you to understand that you don't need all of this advanced stuff. Because designing a game isn't hard. What's hard is getting a finished product that you can sell, and that's an entirely different thing. If you want to design a game just to have fun and to enjoy yourself, then let's go for it. If you want to make a product, we'll go through those steps, maybe, a few months down the line. It's really cool seeing some more behind the scenes stuff for City of Kings. Oh, Swift, it's my absolute pleasure. I love to share this stuff, and it's one of the reasons I keep it, is I want people to realize that, I went through all these processes. You can see here, these are hand-drawn icons. It's probably not overly great for you to see on the screen, but these are just basic, simple little things that I was drawing around with. Down here, you'll see that this is just a piece of paper that got stuck on. I thought to myself, I like the idea of giving starting icons and starting skills. This is something that is now in the final game. But once upon a time, I just stuck it on. There was no need to reprint this or create this. Just because people were playing the game and I was doing prototyping with people, it didn't matter how it looked, because right now you're not trying to create something that looks beautiful. Again, you'll see, and there's not too much left here, but these are just some of the original sketches of how bits were going to work, playing around with how I wanted the character screen to look, how I wanted the worker screen to look. You can see the worker section here. You can see the equipment where I had the different items. You can see my terrible drawing of the bottom over here. These are all the things which I started to play around with. And as the game progressed, as I say, it eventually became something that we could move on and start selling. So I'm going to move these over to the side just in a minute, because there's one more thing that I want to talk about. Now, I've just told you it's very easy to get going. I've just told you just need a pen, you just need a rubber, you just need a pencil. I found my pencil. We are absolutely solved. I was panicking then. I thought it was under the notebook, but it wasn't. But we're good. So when I design games now, I have got a lot more stuff, because over the years I've collected it. I've taken the scraps from games, replacements if I've got broken things, just secondhand games that I've taken the resources from. And I'm just going to walk you through a bit of this now. What I'm about to show you is a really basic supply of this. You can get these things from craft shops. You can get them from Amazon. You can get them from all sorts of places. Most board game stores will have some parts of these available. And I have a lot more. Most of them are in my office. This is just my backup stuff that I have at my house. So you'll see here, I have a bag of tokens. These are just a bag of tokens. They have no purpose, but when I'm prototyping, it's great to have some tokens. You'll see in this bag over here, I've just got some blank dice. These are great for drawing on. I have some Sharpies that allow me to draw into those dice. I have some large dice, because sometimes it's fun when you're prototyping just to have things a little bit bigger so you can clearly and easily write stuff onto them. What I actually do these days is I generally use a lot of stickers, and everything I do, I put onto a sticker, and then I would put that sticker onto the dice, onto cardboard, onto paper, because it means, again, you can reuse them, you can take them off. But these are things that unfortunately I don't have with me. The final thing, which is really useful, and just about any game can use these, I think that they're absolutely fantastic, is a blank deck of cards. You can get these online very easily, they're very cheap, and these are basically just playing cards that are completely blank. I use these for so many things. The first thing I use them for is quite simply creating cards. I can write on them very easily. I don't need to do anything on a computer. I can just get my pen, I can get a pencil, and I can write on the cards. The second thing I use them for is I cut them up. I will turn them into tokens. These are thicker than paper, and what you'll find when you're prototyping is if you use lots of little pieces of paper, it will blow all over the place. It will start to get really difficult. If you're familiar with the Isle of Cats, which is my polyomino game, that game was a nightmare to have as paper because you just couldn't place pieces. But now I just use blank cards. So maybe a pad of paper, a pencil, and a deck of blank cards is what you need to get going. Hey, thank you so much for joining. Straight taking components from other games, cubes, meeples can be fun to use too. Exactly that. So a lot of the stuff you'll see here. So I'm just going to go through some trays. This is a tray of stuff. I don't know what half of these things are. There's wooden tokens, some legacy games I've played. So games that once you've played them, you rip them up and destroy them, and then you throw stuff away. Imagine the nightmare of paper cats. Oh, I assure you, it was the worst thing possible. So These are just random pieces. Here's a blue car. I have no idea what this blue car is from. I will probably never need it or use it, but it's useful to have. You'll see here's just more cubes, more resources. Again, more cubes, more resources. I have trays and trays of these cubes. You'll see parts from the City of Kings. You'll see parts from Vidoran Gardens. You'll see all sorts of things. But these are just the resources that I have to hand. So you can mark stuff up. This is what's really, really important. As we work through this, please do feel free to ask questions, to give ideas, because we are slowly going to now be moving into actually designing a game. What I wanted to do was really just start and give a basic overview. I want people to be encouraged to give this a try because it's really not that difficult to get started. So the question is, why are we doing this? And let's come back over here just for a second, because I think it's important just to really talk through the purpose of this. I design games for a living. For a while now, I've had an idea in the back of my head, and I thought to myself, this is something I would like to explore. I've not really thought about how it's going to work, what I'm going to do with it, but I thought it was a cool idea. And we often get these ideas, and that's all they ever are. But what we don't do is we don't then just start. We're too afraid. How do we get to a point where we turn that into a game? And with the quarantine, I'm someone who doesn't really enjoy sitting in a room on my own. I hate isolation. I like talking through ideas. I like to talk through what I'm doing, to go for walks and think about it. I can't do that right now. So I thought, rather than wait for all of this to be lifted, I was going to come back and I was just going to stream. I was going to go through it with you guys and see where we can get through. Churatuk wanted to make sure that I popped in and thank you for making Isle of Cats. It's definitely my favourite Kickstarter game, and while I rarely get a chance to play it, I love the game and cats. Well, thank you so much for dropping by, and I'm really glad to hear that you're enjoying the game. If you didn't see last night, I did a live stream of a remote edition of that to allow you to play at home without having other people around or to play with friends over the internet. I will be doing another live stream of that tomorrow, and you are welcome to come and join that. You can find all of the details on our website. So, what is this game going to be about? Where are we? My thoughts are quite straightforward. It's a really simple idea. I have a penguin-like race in the Isle of Cats, and they're called the Ockle. I have been obsessed with the idea of making a game featuring them for a long time. I've played around with all sorts of different games, and it's now time for me to really think about how I'm going to do that. I want it to be a thinky game and a puzzly game, as all of my games have a level of puzzliness to it. But I don't want it to be too giant, too heavy, too complicated, because that's something that's a bit too hard. Thank you, Barian, for joining. I really appreciate it. And for following, thank you so much. So I want to play around with this idea of what I can do. Now, in the City of Kings universe, this race, they have been mind controlled. So Vesh, the evil warlord who's taking over everything, has taken them over. He's manipulating them into doing things, and they have become an evil race. But before this happened, they were just friendly penguins. You know, they were slightly humanoid, they would have chats, they could talk to you, and they really, really found it difficult to, do anything but just live life, because they were these wonderful humanoid penguins, and what better to focus on for a game? I think that the hard part is to quit the job. Ideas I also have. Do you think that having time is important? Do you imagine what you do having a job? So Crazy Puzz, this is one of the interesting things. So when I first started doing this, I was working a full-time job. I designed the entirety of the City of Kings. I went through the whole process of getting all of the artwork, the graphic design, playtesting. I spent a few years working on this game alongside my full-time job. And there are pros and cons to that. One of the challenges that I find these days is I have a lot more time to work on games because it's what I do full time. So let's say we make a game this evening and it's ready to playtest. I then have to arrange a playtest with people, and they have full-time jobs. So, it might be in the evening. Obviously, right now, the quarantine is different, but typically speaking, we might organize this for, Monday next week. And until then, I've got to sit and wait. And then we do the playtest, and on Tuesday morning, I'm good to make changes. I'm ready to go, and I can do it again on Tuesday night. But they have a full-time job. So I found that when I went to doing this full-time, it still was like, there were different challenges because you had the pros, you could work on it more, but you had the cons that you couldn't play test as frequently as you would want. So actually working on it around a job can be quite good early on, especially for those of you who don't have the big communities for testing your games. The majority of board game designers also have their regular jobs. Completely. Again, if you're a designer and you're not going to be publishing the game, you're not going to be producing it, manufacturing it, doing the logistics, if you're purely just designing a game, plenty and plenty of those designers are just doing it in their spare time. Carving out 10 to 20 minutes a day will get you farther than you think, faster than you think. Committing to making small amounts of progress is important. I completely agree Flat Out Games, because it really is one of these things where you can just progress. The hardest thing is getting started. It's so easy to be afraid. I mean, I can assure you right now, I'm terrified of what we're about to do. I've never designed a game with people watching me. I have not even thought about how this game's going to work. I've got a theme. I've got one concept, and that concept is it's a race. But I don't want it to be a normal race. It's going to be a cooperative race where everyone is racing at the same time and you're all working together to get through this race. Now, just the concept of how do you do a cooperative race? What on earth does that mean? How can you have these people racing, and who are they competing with? If you and me are both racing and we're trying to race to somewhere and we've got to work together and we both win or we both lose, what is the race? And this is one of the things that I've been thinking about in my head a little bit. And how do we do this? And honestly, I don't know the right answer. Some of the thoughts I've had are, I don't know if they'll work with more players. They might work with 2 players. They might work with 4. Will they work with 1? And these are one of the things. I've designed many games that have been great 2-player games, but they don't work with 1, 3, or 4 players. And I don't want to be designing games just for 2 players. So we're going to go through this and see what we can do. I was wondering, considering how these games are evolving from the City of Kings universe, those prototypes didn't necessarily look based on lore. Did you start with mechanics lore and now just enjoy building off the lore? So the world was built. So for anyone who's not aware, all of my games are designed within the City of Kings universe. And that is a world I've been building for years now. My first game was called The City of Kings, which was just really about one of the most important events in the timeline of that world. Then there was Vidoran Gardens that was set as a backstory of one of the characters, or one of the races, I should say. And then the Isle of Cats was a subpart which talked about an island within this world. So these days, my game designs and my mechanics are they bounce off each other. As you've just heard, I'm interested in the Ockle, in a penguin-like racing game, and that's something that quickly has been inspired by the lore of the game. With some of my games, there's a bit of back and forth. When I first started out, I always knew I wanted to create this world because I was like a huge fan of World of Warcraft, of games, these big epic fantasy adventures. Final Fantasy was another one, 7, 8, 9. I played those so much when I was younger, and some of the more modern ones. And I always knew I wanted this kind of unraveled story. So the mechanics and the theme would bounce off each other. A great example of this was Sashara, who's the Sakura of the City of Kings. So she's this cat-like creature. She's very yellow. She's designed to kind of blend in with the deserts. And we were really struggling because from an artistic perspective, we wanted her to have more to her. We wanted her to have another colour. And within the game, we wanted her to have some sort of theme, some sort of system, which is what she used. And we came up with this concept of poison, because poison can be most often green, and green is a good colour to go with the yellow that we were using. So that was something that really was a mechanical artwork kind of combo, which really drove that decision. So let's get started with this game. And honestly, I've got no idea how this is going to go. So let's jump back to the table and we will see. I've got a pad of paper and I've got a pencil, as we talked about. Let me just find a blank page and we can have a think. So I am going to, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a pencil and I'm going to talk through the basics. So this is some of the process I go through and some of the things that I've started to learn. We are doing a racing game. So we're going to start over here. What I might do actually is use a pen because it might just be a little bit blacker on the screen, and maybe we'll bring this down to here. You will have to forgive my handwriting. It is not a requirement for designing games. So if we're going to start here and we are going to move over here and we're going to get here. And this is the start. And of course, this is the end. So the first thing I want to think about is how long is it going to take to get from the start to the end? I want this game to be designed around cards. I want you to be playing cards to influence how far you move and what you are going to move. You know, the A to B, it's not going to be rolling dice. It's not going to be building things up or coins or anything else. It's going to be a deck building style game, I think, because I've not really done a deck building game that's been released yet, and it's something that I'm somewhat intrigued in. I don't think it's going to be a huge deck building game. I expect it's going to be a case of you start with some cards and you'll get a few extras. Maybe you have like 10 cards and by the end of the game you'll have 15 or something. I like this idea of unlocking things, adding them to your hand, but keeping it simple. One of the reasons that I feel like this would be good for deck building is because the racetrack, whatever that becomes, is going to be something that's going to be quite big on the table. It's going to be quite prominent. And I've learned with games like the City of Kings that if you have a big board in the middle, it's very difficult to then have a big player sheet or something for the players to have in front of them as well. It takes up a lot of space. So these are things that now as a publisher, that's the word I'm looking for. I think about the kind of the requirements for the game to be sellable and to work on a table, as well as the game design itself. So, Chirotak, a co-op race game. What about a co-op stealth race where each player can adjust either the group's roles or the opponent's roles? So, at the moment, I don't really want to have an opponent. Well, there'll be some sort of AI opponent, but I feel like that's kind of along the lines of what I want to do. I want you to be able to move your thing or influence the movement of something else that will start to kind of interact with what you're trying to do. So, same, good questions with Illusion are one of the same. How about a vehicle that collapses over time and players have to keep the vehicle active or having to keep some villains away? So that's pretty cool. I think that in the City of Kings universe, vehicles aren't too prominent. They are generally there's some machines and people are going to be riding horses and things, but you could have something like that. But I like to try and keep it based as much on the characters as possible. Again, from a publisher perspective, I find that artwork around characters is more appealing to a lot of people. If you have a game that's focused around a vehicle, then a lot of the artwork is going to be around that vehicle. Whilst if you have a game that's focused around the characters, and in this case kind of penguin animals, then the focus is going to be a lot more on those. So I love the concept. Good. Hopefully it's going to work out. Have you played the bicycle racing game Flamme Rouge? Yeah, I have played Flamme Rouge. I've played quite a few racing games. I'm sure there are many that I haven't played. Co-op racing brings some sort of mechanical vehicles to mind. Every player can occupy a certain aspect. Sounds like you're going for something like Clank, but closer to 5-minute dungeon in play style. Thematically, what is the objective? Isle of Cats is to help save the cats. Verdoran Gardens is wander through the gardens. Is there a final objective to the penguins? Great question. Escaping from an avalanche, penguins eyesight. If not vehicle, maybe pack of penguins. So, some great ideas there. This is what I've been thinking for the theme. Originally, I thought that it was going to be... So, as I say, I've done a lot of thinking about this, but I haven't thought about it mechanically. So originally my thinking was, you were going to start here, and you were going to race to the end. Hopefully you're with me so far. But there was going to be someone else who, in fact, what I can do is I can use some of my handy pieces. So let's use purple and let's use green. As you were racing, there is going to be someone chasing you. And if they catch you, you're going to lose. And I thought that was going to be an interesting thing, because the idea then is that you're trying to get to the end before them, you're racing with them, and that's kind of very standard kind of racing. But it didn't really work for me. So the next thought I had was maybe you could add some extra levels to it. Let's say that not only are you racing across the track, but there's creatures in front of you and you have to fight them or avoid them and get past them. So you have to take them out as you get to them so you can get to the end before being catched. Now, the problem I had with this was very straightforward. Straight away in my head, I said, is this now just a dungeon crawl? If I'm having to get from A to B and I have a certain amount of time to do that and I'm having to kill things on the way, is it basically just a dungeon crawl that you have to kill stuff quickly and it's less about the strategy of the fighting and more about the movement, and is it less of a racing game? So I started to think that that's not really what I wanted. So here's where I've kind of come to at the moment. And, a lot of this I'm making up as we go. So I'm thinking that we are the penguins. We'll have them as the purple because the purple is, of course, the best colour. And we are trying to get to the end. Someone said a minute ago, what is the purpose? The Isle of Cats, you are rescuing cats. With the Verdoran Gardens, you are trying to just have a journey through this garden and creating the path of where you go. So here's my thought. We have an evil warlord called Vesh. As everyone knows who's familiar with the City of Kings, Vesh is my evil enemy that features in all of my games. And we have said that in the City of Kings story that the Occul have been mind controlled. They've been taken over by Vesh. So let's assume that this end location here is the Occul homeland. Perhaps this is their city. Perhaps there is the kingdom where the king lives. Perhaps this is just the whole area. It doesn't really matter. But I think it's probably the kingdom of where they are. And let's assume that Vesh is on his way there with his armies. Just like in the Isle of Cats, he is heading there, and when he gets there, he intends to destroy it. But here's the difference. We are not interested in saving the Occul, because the Occuls are these fierce fighting warriors. They have the winning chance. The problem is, and here's the catch, the Occul don't know that he's coming. And if he gets there without them finding out, they'll be taken by surprise and they will be destroyed. So how about we, as the Occul, we are starting behind Vesh, and we are the spies, or we're people who are just going around, and we've seen him. And what we've got to do is we've got to race, we've got to get past him, and we've got to get to the Occul homeland and tell them that Vesh is coming before he turns up. And that way we can get them ready. So in my eyes, this is now a race where we're not racing necessarily against someone, but we're racing to get there first to tell the people at the end that someone is coming. Why this is really cool, and a few people talked about this earlier, was now we can have some sort of kind of interactive fighting, because you've got two types of movement. We've got the Occul that are moving along the track to get to the end, but we've also got Vesh that's moving along the track to get to the end. So now, perhaps not only can we move, but perhaps we can do things that move him backwards. And this, I think, I can't remember who it was, I do apologise, but someone was saying earlier that having the ability to control both characters and moving them back and you forward could be interesting. And as we progress further into the game, Vesh can get faster and faster, and we can have more ways of trying to put him back. If we're in front of him, perhaps we can do things that we can drop in his way to make him move around them. Perhaps if we're behind him, we can do things that trap him or knock him over and slow him down. Maybe if we're next to him, we can shove him out the way or just do something to distract him. But this is what I'm thinking, and this is kind of where I've got to. So the question becomes, how do we turn this into a game? So let's have a quick look. Penguins, what's the end? While they're racing. So we just went through that. A group of penguins escape mind control and they're trying to get to freedom. So I think this is before they've been mind controlled. So this is trying to get there to save the race before Vesh has turned up and done that. Does he have a vehicle or is he walking? That works well. You can scale up by getting there earlier. Yeah, I think that he's not going to be an individual on his own. It's going to be like an army. It's going to be a big group of things. So I can imagine some of them are on like horses, some of them are walking. If you imagine like a commander with this huge army of people around him. So I think that we're not going to be, like like shouting at him and like getting in his way. I think it's going to be things where the army's going to have to be stopped to make a decision about, should I go over here and explore or should I come back? It's more about the ways you can imagine, like if you're an army and you've gone to bed for the night and then you see one of the enemy, you're going to kind of investigate that, and maybe you're going to see, if you see a group of enemies somewhere, perhaps that's going to be enough to distract you to think we need to kill them to make sure that they don't get to the city. Perhaps Vesh is aware that the Okko are trying to get back and he wants to do it by surprise. So he's deliberately kind of spending time to stop the scouts and to slow them down. So dance fight, yes. Reminds me of the show I just watched, The King's Letter on Netflix, getting a letter to the king before the army comes. Exactly that. I'm not familiar with the show, but that's exactly the kind of story or the theme that I'm thinking about. I think it gives us enough parameters to have a cooperative racing game where we've got a kind of impending doom, and it's not so much a time limit, because yes, Vesh is going to move towards the end, but it's more focused on how do we interact with him? How do we slow him down? How do we stop him getting there? One of the concerns with this is what happens if Vesh gets to here and we're still over here. At this point, maybe he's too far away for us to do stuff and we're just going to lose. But he's obviously going to still take a few turns to get there. So we need to make sure the game is designed in a way where these kind of big distances don't really happen. And it's more about these little swings of kind of things that are happening. I think that's where we want to be focusing. An element of push your luck, like what's time, Mr. Wolf, I think, trying to hide that you've broken mind control, hiding, blocking line of sight, obstacles, interactions. Exactly that. It's really about trying to the deceptiveness. Are we going to spend a bit of time putting a trap in front of him, or are we going to get further ahead and maybe break a bridge? Maybe if we have, maybe over here we can have let's get something. This is a bridge. I know it may look like a house, but our choice could be, do we get in front of him and drop a little decoy in front of him that's going to slow him down for one turn? Or do we decide to not do that, race to the bridge, cross the bridge and destroy the bridge, which then is going to take him 2 turns to rebuild it? Now that's a really good decision, because you can say, well, we could take the immediate, easily slightly slow him down, or we can, risk that we can get far enough ahead to kind of slow him down again. And I think that's really an interesting part of the decisions people want to be making. So there's a tower defense aspect whereby if we get in, I guess that there's something along those kind of lines where you'll be like, it's like one person or one army coming and you're trying to stop them, not necessarily stop them before they get there, but you're trying to slow them down so you can get your defenses built up in that same kind of way. If we are racing to capital, seeing the Okko Kingdom along the way might be great. Yeah, I think that maybe it should be the capital and this whole world is the Okko kind of homeland, because at that point you can imagine a lot of it's frozen. There's going to be the Okko will know the area, they'll know the terrain, they'll have, guerrilla warfare, they'll have the advantage because they'll know where things are. So when we talked about the bridge, they know that bridge is there, and it will make sense. Because normally you could say, well, if these 2 people are here and they're moving along, then why do one person know there's a bridge and someone else doesn't? But this gives them the advantage that they know where stuff is. And maybe there are people around that can help them, because you might have like shops, for want of a better word, where you can buy equipment or buy things to help you. And it wouldn't really make sense if you weren't in a place that you're familiar with. So what playtime are you considering that affects the scope too? So hopefully 60 to 90 minutes. That's a good area for me. And we will start going through that. I want to kind of keep up with the chat at this point as well, because I think it's really interesting to just be having these back and forwards. I don't want to just sit here and design something, because that really takes away some of the fun. It would be interesting to have the ability for all players to control a variety of Okko. Then the players would have limited communication potentially. Some form of limited communication seems important in the co-op game. Yeah, so Flat Out Games, I completely agree. One of the games that, and it seems weird saying that at the moment, as I've just said, this is going to be like a 60 to 90 minute game, but one of the games I'm really obsessed about copying is Magic Maze. And when I say copying, I don't mean copying the game, but I mean copying the experience. So I think that the rule that I want to go with is every player can move every character. You do not have your own character. Perhaps you have one that if you move gives you some sort of bonus, but I wanted this to be more based about the fact that everyone has things they can do, and it's about how you move things into the right position. So for example, let's say that we've got these two Occult characters here. Let's say we've got a bridge. Let's say that I am on my turn, I have the ability to move things like 4 spaces. So maybe I move him 4 spaces, but perhaps I don't have the ability to actually destroy the bridge. So now, if I'm going to move again, there's no point in me moving him another 4 because obviously he's then past the bridge. So at that point, I might move this other character 4 spaces. Whilst on your turn, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I can destroy bridges. So if Frank manages to get this Occult to the bridge, then on my turn, I can do the destroying, and I'm not going to move things, but I'm going to do that. And this is what I kind of want. I want the idea of everyone being able to do certain abilities, and maybe these are the things you can buy, and you might buy one, I buy another. Maybe they're kind of, bonuses or things that we have for our leader characters, but I really like this kind of idea. Could have a scouting action, gathering more information on the army, completely that. Your rebels in his army trying to slow his progress without being found out as you try to make sure a messenger can get out of the camp and get to the Occult City. That kind of thing I think is really interesting. Why does the route have to be linear? So I don't think it does. For the purpose of this, I've drawn a straight line and I'm talking about getting from here to here, but I really want this to be a kind of going round. Maybe you go backwards, maybe you go forwards. That's completely up to you. So I think that that's a really good point. I don't want this to be representative of we're moving in a straight line. I just want this to be more of a kind of a metaphorical representation that we're trying to get to a certain place. It's not linear. Another question, mechanics-wise, there'll be hidden information or purely open information co-op. That would depend on the game. I think until we start with the mechanics, it's going to be really hard to see how that comes through. So I think that we'll have to work that out as we kind of go through. This is less how the game will look, more of a brainstorming session. Yeah, exactly that. So puzzle out details, simpler manner. Does it have to be a one army? Could we have multiple win conditions, reduce the forces to 0, get there first? I think that I certainly, at the moment at least, I like the idea of just being kind of get to the end. Or get to the end before they do. The reason is that I don't want to focus too much on strategical combat. I want it to be puzzly, so I want you to be thinking, okay, well, we could go to that terrain, we could come to this terrain, we know he's going that way, what are we going to do with this? But I don't want it to be too much like fighting and too much we've got health, too much we've got to keep track of all of these things. I think keeping track of the location of Vesh and keeping track of the location of where you are is as much information that I want to be tracking as possible because it just keeps it a bit simpler. But it's possible that we may add other aspects. Perhaps rather than the idea of having to get to the end before him, perhaps where the middle ground comes. And this is something that's just come up to me from what you've just said, is perhaps, we've talked about our bridges, and perhaps what we're actually going to do is we're going to have this. And now we can find these weird little wooden houses that have appeared, and we could say, actually, perhaps these are 3 bridges. So now we may be, as a player team, thinking to ourselves, well, can we destroy all 3 of these bridges? Because if we destroy them all, he can't get there, and therefore we win by default. So we don't have to worry about playing out the rest of the game. So maybe it's as much about how do you stop him getting there as it is about how do you kind of get there first. One of the things I think is really important to remember is he is this giant warlord with so many armies and people, creatures that are coming with him, and we're just like 2 or 3 penguins. So I don't want us to be able to defeat him as such, because thematically it just doesn't tie in for me. When playing Magic the Gathering, it's always annoying to have the opponent take a card from my hand or from the board and put it on top of my deck because it slows me down. If Vesh has a deck, maybe the player's going to slow him down by putting stuff on top of that he has to work through. I think that's a great idea. I hadn't really thought too much about how he's going to move yet. I assumed it would probably be some sort of deck that has numbers. I feel like there's probably going to be routes that he's going to follow that we're assuming, but I don't know exactly. So I think that being able to manipulate that is really interesting. And perhaps we can manipulate that through putting stuff on his deck. Perhaps we can manipulate that from scouting and taking like the top 2 cards and looking at them so we can predict we'll know exactly what he's doing. Perhaps someone said earlier about being spies. Perhaps we can gather some information of what kind of stuff he's got. Perhaps we've got the bridges again, things like that. I think is really interesting. Trouble is, it works so much better with that half-known info. Do you take the power guard? Do you take the next step? Then you kind of stuck with one player trying to play the bad guy. Draw a wobbly line. I could have drawn a wobbly line. I think that my plan was this is the thing, I don't really know what we're doing. So my plan wasn't necessarily to spend so much time discussing what we're discussing, but you guys are throwing so many great ideas out there that I don't want to be stopping. I don't want to just keep going because it's really interesting. This is the brainstorming, as someone said earlier. Maybe Frank needs to put a bullet list of ideas in the sidebar on the screen. I could do that, but I think that that's going to start adding lots of stuff down. And my way of designing is perhaps a bit different to a lot of people. So I'm really keen on, I don't want to say doing it from memory, but keen on working through things that are stuck in my head. So if we've now talked through 5 or 6 ideas, so for example, someone a minute ago was saying about putting cards into Vesh's deck and being able to slow him down, and that's a great idea. I really like that idea. Someone was saying it right at the beginning about obviously being able to move us or move him backwards, which is something which I want to be doing. And these ideas stick in my head. If I think that it's a great idea, then if I remember it, it's going to go into the game. If I don't remember it, then it wasn't, for me personally, it wasn't strong enough for me to feel like it has to stay in the game. And maybe later I'll remember, perhaps it'll be a mistake, but I really like to design by what are the key things that are staying in my head that make me want to do this. I'm not a fan of taking notes or writing documents, and that comes down to me personally. Lots of people are different. If you struggle with this kind of stuff, then take notes and keep lists. But personally, I like to kind of go with the flow. I like to go with the organic side of design of what's working, what isn't working, what do I want to change, and not get too locked down into this is something I said earlier that I want to do, so now how do I put that into the game? I've had too many prototypes that have just fallen over because I've been trying to cram ideas into them, and really I should have just let them kind of naturally develop. Less goals, more bonuses. Maybe you could apply the fate deck concept to this game and have it where each card you play has the flip X number of cards to the fate deck, then based on the suit and number, Vesh could do things. That kind of thing sounds good. Don't want a design to end up bloating unnecessarily. Exactly. So let's talk about some really basic stuff. I'm not going to spend hundreds of hours for us just designing out this huge game to scratch in this one session. I want us to do this over multiple sessions. I want people to be able to go away, think about it, and come back. And I'm not going to work on the game outside of the streams, at least for the time being. And if I really desperately want to, then I'm just going to stream more because I really want to be able to just work this through on camera as much as we can. So let's go back to some basic maths and some basic numbers. One of the rules that I have, and this is a personal rule again, not everyone will agree with this, but I think it's a really good starting point. Because the question is, where do you start? We're talking about a racing game, a cooperative racing game, and maybe, I don't know, does anyone know any cooperative racing games? I'm not sure I'm familiar with too many, but I know of any, to be honest, so I'd be intrigued. But let's think about how do we start this? And one of the things I always think about is, okay, so we're starting here and we are going here. And we've said, it's going to, not worrying about playtime, but let's think about turns. Because turns are a really interesting thing to me. I know that some games you don't take many turns. Some games you take more, but you will often be surprised. In the City of Kings, you can play that game for 2 hours, and often players will only take maybe 8 to 10 turns. You may find that low. You may think that you'd be doing a lot more, but there are a lot of games where 10 turns, especially more complicated games, is as many as you're going to take. Now, for games like, the Isle of Cats, where it's a lot more kind of do a little bit, do a little bit, do a little bit, you're going to be doing more than that. If you're familiar with games like, Terraforming Mars, they break a turn down. You might play through 8 rounds, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rounds, and each round you do lots of stuff, but you can always break it down into that kind of 10 area. So on that basis, I'm going to start this off with thinking we're going to play 10 turns. Maybe it'll be 12, maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be less. Maybe as we play the game, we decide actually it's good, the turns are so quick that it needs to be a 20-turn game. But I like to start on that basis. So we're going to say that it's going to take us 10 turns to get from here to here. The next thing is, how are we going to move there? And we've talked about playing cards. I don't want to be playing 1 card per turn. I think playing 1 card per turn is not enough of a decision in my eyes. You want to have the ability to do combos. You want to be able to do more stuff. So I'm thinking that on a turn, maybe you're playing 2 or 3 cards. Something like that. 2 is a good number because playing 2 cards gives you the ability to do different things, to do multiple things. You're not just, okay, I'm going to move a guy 4 spaces. It can give you the chance to be a bit more interested in that. Again, if you're moving multiple characters, just being able to move 2 people twice, whether I move him twice, whether I move him twice, whether I move them once each, that gives you more decisions than just having that one thing. So I think that you're probably going to be playing 2 cards. Let's say that maybe it's 3 and maybe it's 1. I've got some ideas about how we're going to play cards, but this is what I'm kind of thinking. So now what I'm thinking is, how far does a card let you move? Now, of course, cards themselves are going to do many things. They're not just going to be about movement, but let's start at the basics. I think that a card should allow you to move 1 to 4 spaces. Again, these are just variables I'm making up, but this is how I start to produce a game. I think about some of the rules. So if I'm moving 1 to 4 spaces, this is good because some racing games will allow you to move 8, 9, or 10. And I think that in a game like this, where we want it to be puzzly, we want it to be strategic, we want to be thinking about how we get somewhere, I don't want to be moving too far in one go. I think that you want to be moving small amounts because that really limits your options. Now, of course, if you've got 2 cards that allow you to move 4 spaces, you're going to be able to move 8, but then that's all you're going to do. So I think that that kind of gives you the ability to boost, but equally I think that you are going to have some sort of restriction. So let's say, 2 cards played, and let's say that each card is going to allow us to move 1 to 4 spaces. Now, obviously, if we take 1 to 4, so we've got a 4, we've got a 3, which is 7, we've got a 2, which is 9, we've got 1, which is a 10. That means that we've got 10 movement over those 4 cards, so 2.5 move per space. If you're playing 2 cards, then on average, you're going to be able to move 5 spaces. So let's say that that allows us, on a turn, on average, to move 5 spaces. Now, obviously, 5 spaces is, this is really just making numbers up at this point. None of this is real, but this is what I like to kind of think through, because now what we've done is we've said, okay, so we are going to play 10 turns. We are going to play, 5 spaces per turn. So we are saying we're going to take 10 turns per player. We're going to play 2 cards, which are going to be 1 to 4 spaces each, which are then going to in total allow us to move an average of 5 spaces per turn. Now, what's really good about this is now we can easily say, okay, that means we're going to move 50 spaces. That is a very straightforward, basic piece of maths, because over 10 turns, 5 spaces per turn, 50 spaces. Now, that isn't anything important, but what that does is it now allows us to really quickly make a board. We can now make a board where the start to the end needs to be 50 spaces, and we've got different variables we can play with. Perhaps the movement on cards becomes 1 to 5. Perhaps the number of cards we play become 3. Perhaps the number of turns we play is 12. So all of these things, these 3 different variables, allow us starting to adjust the size of the board. And this means now we're already ready. We've not thought about how the game works, but we're already ready to make a board just based on this simple set of rules, which I think is a really good starting point because it gives us something to start with. So let's go back to the chat and catch up with that. So some games are real time. Apologies if I do miss over anything. If I do, please feel free to ask it again in a bit. Wondering, given the kind of mechanical tone of your game, something like the Spirit Island preview deck could be nice. Like the Occult are observing Vesh and seeing their next move, so there's always something people can act on, even if they don't know what others might do. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Maybe have the army composition established and set up. Scouting lets you look at the cards each time. When you reach the end, you can build the Penguin defense, ideally full of counters. Something akin to Flip City, where you do what you do, then push your luck. Yeah, completely. That seems like a really interesting idea. Not a co-op, but the movement mechanics you're proposing, players, communally controlled pool of meeples, remind me of Journey to the Center of Earth. I've not played Journey to the Center of Earth, but I will have a look at it. That sounds really interesting. In strategy, the lower values can often make them more meaningful. Completely agree, Swift Illusion. I mean, this is the thing. 1 to 4 spaces is a really interesting range to me, because it means that 4 is 4 times more than 1. I know that sounds stupid, but if you went 2 to 4, then your range goes from 2 to double 2, which is 4, which means that you basically have this level of range. But if you go from 1 to 4, you've suddenly got twice the amount of range, even though you've only added 33% extra stuff on. So it's a weird kind of thing to try and describe, but it is interesting. Ranges are something I think about a lot, and it's why in the City of Kings, my characters went from 1 to 10 rather than from 3 to 10 or 3 to 9, because that growth from 1 to 2 is huge. The amount you gain is so much compared to any future gain. From 2 to 3, you're gaining half as much overall as 1 to 2, even though you're gaining the same. And it's one of those weird things where it's a balance in my eyes of maths and psychology. You want, mathematically, you're gaining the same thing, but psychologically, I don't know this word I'm trying to say, you're gaining so much more. And as a player, you feel like you're doing something great. If you move 1 and then I move 4, the psychological difference in that is huge. And this is one of the interesting things with game design, I find, is that sometimes it's about numbers that work. Sometimes it's about the experience that players get from when they're doing that. So let me have a look. Maybe 35. Looking at 50 spaces, given the sound of the concept so far, I think 1 to 3 spaces would be better scope. Depends on the mechanics bit around it too. Yeah, I think that the idea I've kind of got is that the cards are probably going to have different costings to them. So it may well be, and this is why I kind of said, with 2 cards played, I'm thinking that it's possibly actually going to be 1 to 3 cards that are played. So you might play 1 card that allows you to move 4, or you may play 3 cards that allow you to move 1, or something along those kind of lines. I'm not entirely sure yet. There's a game, oh my goodness, what's it called? Slay the Spire. And Slay the Spire has a card payment system that I love. And again, that's something that I'm really tempted to be using in this, which is basically that cards, and I might be getting it wrong for Slay the Spire, but this is the interpretation I have, is that cards cost 0, 1, 2, or 3, and on your turn you can spend up to 3. So I don't know if any cost 0 actually, but yeah. So you can play 3 cards that cost 1. You can play a card that costs 1 and a card that costs 2. You can play a card that costs 3. So you've kind of got the powerful cards that only allow you to do one thing, or you've got the weaker cards that give you more kind of control. And that's the kind of system which I think would work really well with this. I also want cards to have more options than 1, but we'll kind of get to that in a minute. So yeah, Slay the Spire is a fantastic game. The whole card costing thing sounds a bit like Epic. Slay the Spire is awesome. I personally hated Epic. Well, hopefully this is going to be a much better game for Epic in your eyes. I don't want to comment. I don't know if I've played Epic. I feel like I have, but I play a lot of games and I'm terrible. And as I see the box pitch, the cover, I really do struggle with it. So some cost X, yes. Some cards do cost X and some do cost 0. So yes. And I like that idea. I like the idea of you can control how powerful a card is. You know, maybe it costs 1, or for every 1 you pay, it gives you the ability to do something. I also think, there's so much we can do with this. I want you to be able to get new cards. Getting new cards probably means you have to pay for them or you have to earn them in some way. Maybe that is going out of your way to get them. Maybe you have to spend. Maybe some of your cards, cards aren't just going to be movement. Some of the cards are probably going to have There's going to be items and interaction actions. Interaction actions, that's one of my least favorite things to say, especially on a live stream. So interaction action is, oh my goodness, I'm losing it. I hate that. In the City of Kings, there's the interact action, and I used to call it the interaction action, and I used to get so confused with myself. But yeah, so some of the cards are going to allow you to interact with things and do things. We've talked about, destroying bridges. So cards aren't just going to be about movement. Some cards are going to be about doing things. Maybe there's currency on cards. Maybe you can discard cards to pay for things. I'm not entirely sure yet whether it's going to be as complicated as you have to pay for them or you have to get somewhere for them. That's something that I think that we'll discover and balance out as time comes on. So you get X energy per turn, and based on that you play cards. Yeah, exactly. Perhaps each card could have an option between fast movement, moderate movement, plus a weak action, or no movement, a strong action. Just a possible alternative to a power costing system. Yeah, I think that that's the kind of thing that's quite interesting. For me, I want every card to have at least 2 options. I think that there's a lot to be said about multi-purpose cards. I don't know yet whether it's every card will be able to do all of the things. If you think about buying, if you think about, interacting, like building, attack, let's say combat for now, it's the wrong word, but let's think about the kind of the combat, the interacting with Vesh. We've got buying, we've got interacting with Vesh, we've got moving. So that's kind of 3 critical different areas. Maybe there'll be more, but I think that each card should probably do 2 of those 3 things. Maybe not all of them. I don't know. Maybe some cards will have 3 options. Maybe the cards you start with have 2 options, and then the cards you can buy have 3 options. Because that way you can start with a deck where you're pretty sure that you're going to get the kind of actions you want, but there's some chance and risk to it. Whilst if you get upgraded cards that have all 3 of them on, then perhaps that's going to kind of change that. But I don't know. We'll see how that kind of comes as we go through it. So instead of the cards telling you how many cards to flip from the Fate deck to control Vesh, it is the energy you as a group have at the end of the turn. But saving energy would let you use more powerful so that's interesting. Maybe Vesh's deck by default will do a certain amount of things, and so here's my problem with that, and this is why I will probably cut it off straight away, but maybe it'll come back. So I was going to say, maybe if you don't use all of your energy, you have that energy to then influence Vesh's deck, which I think is what you were saying. The problem I have with that is I'm a big fan of making sure that players on their turns can do things, to make sure that they feel like they've achieved something, to make sure that each player on their turn is doing cool stuff, especially in a game like this, because there's a risk that if we're all moving the same things, I'm going to be saying to you, oh, you do that and I'll do this. And if now I'm not spending my energy because I'm stopping Vesh, the problem is on your turn, you're still spending your energy, you're still doing stuff, and suddenly it feels like you're doing lots of stuff, and we're going to have a discussion about what we do with Vesh's deck, right? We're not just going to say, okay, well, I didn't spend my energy, so I get to choose what card we get rid of, because you're going to tell me, you're going to discuss with me, and I feel like what happens then is I'm sacrificing part of my turn for you to then still have a whole turn and be involved in that decision. And you could say, well, don't let them be involved, but that's not a fun restriction for a game. You want people to feel like they can do cool stuff. And again, it's why I like this energy system on the cards, because if you can pay 1 and I can pay 2, or I can pay if I can pay 1 and 2 and do 2 things, or 3 ones, it allows me to build up combinations and interesting decisions. Whilst if I'm suddenly restricting some of that energy spend, then maybe that's not interesting. But, with that said, it doesn't mean that I can't have cards that kind of allow me to do that. Maybe there's a 1 cost card that allows me to influence his deck. So effectively, it's the same thing. It's the same, I'm saving energy to do that, but instead of just saving energy to do it, maybe I'm buying a card to do it, so then I still feel like I'm doing something. As you can see, these are the steps that I talk through. I'm a big fan of just thinking through how stuff works before getting too far into the game. So you said deck building, but what if it's actually a deck destroying game where you try to ruin Vesh's deck to make him fail? Yeah, that could be an interesting idea as well. I think that at the moment, I'm a bit confused about the way that, not confused, but not sure. Thank you, Hey Maya, for following. I really appreciate that. And guys, if anyone is interested in kind of doing these more often, then please do follow along on Twitch, because you'll get notifications of when I go live. And this will be a regular thing. I'm going to be trying to do this at least once a week, hopefully moving forward. So yeah, I think that destroying his deck is something to certainly consider as an option. I'm not sure yet on how we would do that, because I've not thought about how his deck's going to work, but it's definitely another option for slowing him down. Forest Ninja, thank you for following as well. I really do appreciate it. So maybe varying costs, spend 1, move 1, spend 3, move 2. Yeah, that could be a great way of doing it. Would be a nice change of pace if you just evolved your deck instead of grew it. Could cause pivots in your deck to be more viable based on what Vesh is doing, the environment obstacles that have shown up. Yeah, I think that that's a fantastic idea. So what's it called? I apologize. As I say, I'm terrible with game names. I own about 800 board games. So I'm one of these people who I play games, I see games all the time, and their names just get lost on me. Mystic Vale, I believe what it's called. So Mystic Vale is a card building game, if I'm talking about the right one. So the cards come into card sleeves, and then each card is kind of on like an acetate, a transparent plastic, where one section of the card is printed on. And then you build up the cards, so you can change the top, the middle, or the bottom. And that could be a really cool idea for this. If I've already talked about the idea of cards having multiple options, then maybe that's a much better way of doing this. Rather than just saying, let's buy more cards, maybe you're manipulating the cards you've got. And that could be quite a fun thing to explore as well. So it would be nice. That's what we just talked about. I think it's awkward in co-op to have a situation you're told not to do something. It feels worse than discussion about doing something. Exactly that. I think it's really important to encourage doing proactivity, to make people feel rewarded. I want there to be team things, where I move to here, you destroy the bridge, and we kind of high five and we're excited because we managed to do it. Maybe obviously it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the kind of interactions. If I don't do anything so I can stop him doing something, just doesn't sound like a fun interaction. Hey, Ginkos, thank you so much for joining us. What about some of the cards have one action for Penguin and another for the Stalker? Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. So another game. So we've talked about Magic Maze. We've talked about Slay the Spire, and another game which is a big influence for the kind of things that I'm thinking about. And if I wasn't doing a co-op game, this is the game that I would be doing, is Mario Kart. So if anyone's familiar with Mario Kart, which is like a Nintendo game, there's been, on all of the different Nintendo consoles, there's been Mario Kart games. And what I love about Mario Kart is it's a racing game that you race around the track, but it has some really basic items. And these are the things that are going through my head. So you've got green shells, and a green shell allows you to shoot in a straight line. And if something's in front of you in that line, then it will get hit and it will make it slow down. Or vice versa, you can fire it backwards in a straight line, and if it hits something, it's going to slow it down. So that's one way. You've got the red shell that you can fire forward, and it's a guaranteed hit, and it's going to slow down the thing in front of you. Obviously, you can avoid it, but let's assume not. You then have the blue shell, and the blue shell is a guaranteed hit for the person in first, regardless of what's between you and them. It kind of breaks some of the other rules. You've then got the banana peel. The banana peel is something you put on the ground behind you, and then if someone drives into it, it slows them down. Or you can throw it forward, and again, if someone drives into it, it slows it down, but it's a lot harder to aim. You've got other items as well, but those kind of, the green shell of straight in the line, the red shell of kind of seeking something out, and the banana peel of dropping it and slowing something down. Those are three of the things that I really like. I think they're really key interactions with Vesh. Wherever he is, the red shell is going to hit him. With the green shell, if we line it up, we're going to get it perfect. With the banana peel, if we're right in front of him, we can slow it down. Because what they encourage positional play. The banana peel could be a very low cost item, because strategically it's a lot harder to make sure you've got it in the right place. You could decide that on luck. We don't know where Vesh is moving, or we might put some other rules. The green shell is about lining up and aiming and firing. Again, it could be more low cost because it's that little bit more difficult. The red shell is that guaranteed hit. So at that point, it's going to be more expensive, but you know it's going to happen. And I think that Mario Kart has really basic, simple items, but they create some really good decisions for what we can do in a board game. And I would argue that in a board game it's more interesting because in Mario Kart, all three of them, whilst the way they hit someone is different, the impact they have is the same. They slow them down. Whilst we have control over that, our banana peel could make them just stop for a turn. It could be that we've broken a bridge or we've put something there or whatever. I keep saying broken a bridge. I don't know why. Let's say, we've put a boulder on the road behind us. So if they're going along that road, they have to move the boulder. Now, the green shell, again, maybe that's the same thing. It's just going to slow them down. Maybe it's a scout that runs past them that they chase down. But with the red shell, perhaps that's something that's a bigger deal for them and it's going to cause them more of a headache. So I really like the concept of that. And one thing I should say at this point with game design is there's lots of games, and not just games, films. I think someone was saying earlier about the King's Letter or something, or newsletter, which is kind of thematically, I guess, similar to what we're doing, that to take inspiration from. Just because we're thinking about banana peel, green shell, red shell for Mario Kart doesn't mean that we're going to be making anything like Mario Kart. It's going to be a very different type of game. Just because we're taking the idea of Magic Maze where you can control different characters doesn't mean that we're creating Magic Maze. Just because we're looking at that energy system from Slay the Spire, these are all things that we can explore, we can take inspiration from and try to use them to build up. And maybe as we progress through the game, we'll start to think, actually, maybe we should make some changes. Maybe we shouldn't do it like this. Perhaps, in Slay the Spire, I think you get free energy. Perhaps in our game 4 is better or 2 is better. Perhaps we don't have things that cost 0. But these are the cool different things I like to think about. 800 games, yeah, I would say collecting games for a long time. Obviously I do play them, but I am a fan of having different games. I really, as a designer, I don't want to use it as an excuse because, I don't know if I wasn't a designer, I'd probably still have lots of games. But I like to see games. I like to play with them. I like to experience them. I like to look at them. Some games I buy because I want to see the components. Some games I buy because I want to play with them. I like to have friends over and I like to have different things available. So I do have a large collection. Of course, that isn't a requirement for anyone to be doing these things. Trip Vesh up with a banana. I think that if I can create a world and make people believe that there's this huge evil warlord that can't be stopped, but then give you a banana peel that will trip him up, then it may slightly break some of the thematic feel to it, but I think it would be funny. I think that's something we should definitely consider. Maybe that should be an Easter egg, something a bit more special that we do further down the line. Vesh deck, 10 cards of cavalry, magicians, infantry, etc. Scouting action, scry, top 3 cards, and then reshuffle the deck. When you reach the end, you then define the defensive compositions of the penguins. No perfect information, but the more you scout, the better your odds are. Recruit more penguins to go into the army by warning villagers along the way. I think that that's a really interesting idea as well. I think that there's a decision to be made about whether the battle happens at the end. If we get to the end, is that it? Have we warned the city and therefore the job of the game is done and that is the end of the narrative? Or do we do it in such a way that not only do you have to get there, but you have to get there in enough time or with enough stuff so that Vesh can be stopped? So you could say that if we get there 5 spaces before Vesh, let's assume a space takes like a day to travel. If we get there 5 spaces before, the city has 5 days, and that means that they've got an army value of 5, and that's what you need to win because Vesh has an army level of 4. But what we could say is if Vesh gets there with 3 days, then obviously we would lose because he's got 4, we've only got 3. But if we've managed to come over here and pick up these guys, and then we've managed to move them, look at that, cones work really well for this, and move back with there, not only have we gotten there with 3 days left, but we've also got there with an additional reinforcement, which then gives us the 4, which means we still win. So there's an interesting aspect there of whether it's just get there in time, or whether we explore the idea of how early you get there and what you get there with. I think that someone was saying earlier about the combat dynamic of whether we're fighting with Vesh and stuff, and maybe this is a good way to represent that same thing without having the fighting side of it. So that's quite interesting. So maybe those two sides of the cards could be a decision between maneuverability and utility, like move versus set trap, cut versus cut through vines to open a shortcut for one of the other oracles on the board. Completely. I think that only two of these options would be on each card. That's exactly what I think that we are talking about here. I think that each card, in my eyes, I think that each card is going to have those multi-purposes, and they've got to be really different. So I can move something for, or I can cut down some vines or destroy a bridge. So what can you do? Can you do this type of action? Can you do that kind of action? We need to get this character to here. We need to get this character to here. We need to have action A to be able to interact with that, and action B to interact with this. Who's got what? Who can move these here? Who can move this here? Vesh is now suddenly changed color. Vesh is now 3 spaces away from here, 4 spaces away from here. So are we going to take the gamble? If we can only do this one, are we going to gamble that Vesh is going to go to this one and we're going to stop him? Or are we going to do both of them and assume that we don't know where he's going? Or are we going to do just this one and have that gamble? These are the things where as players, I think they're really cool decisions. If I say to you, great, we've got 2 pathways, we don't know which one he's going down. He's going to be at path 1, path A in 1 turn. He's going to be at path B in 2 turns. We don't know if he's going to move 1 or 2. So do we want to definitely do 1 and then gamble he's only moving 1, or he's not going to take path B? Or do we want to definitely do both of them? And these are the things where you've got your push your luck, right? Because you're now taking a risk of, well, maybe the likelihood of him taking this path is 50-50. The likelihood of him moving 1 or 2 spaces is 50-50. So now suddenly we're saying, well, there's quite a good chance he's not going to move 2 spaces and go down that path. So let's put our resources into the other one. But maybe that's too much of a risk for us, because if he crosses that path, he's going to get a shortcut. And I think you can see I'm getting excited, right? These are the decisions that I want players to be making cooperatively, because now that decision is no longer based on our cards. That decision is no longer based on what we've got in front of us. That decision is based on one thing: the discussion that we have around the table and what we are willing to risk. Do we think as a group the reward of that decision is worth the risk? What have we got to gain? What have we got to lose? Is that going to stop us getting to the next one in time? And I think that these are really cool, interesting ideas. If we can get that into a game, it's going to really drive some interest into this. I own 17 versions of Scrabble. I don't know if you're saying that truthfully or not, but if you do, that's incredible. If you don't, I'm sure there are at least 17 versions out there, and I assume that you are much better at English, writing and spelling, and even talking than probably I am. So there's an aspect of a racing game I think could be fun, having them move too fast, which disables them because it breaks up their formations. I think that there's a lot of decision here about the positional play between the characters, because if we start here, you could easily say, let's race him to the end, and then we'll move him to the end. But I think that doesn't work well. Perhaps some cards do require 2 people. So perhaps if we want to destroy this bridge, both of these Okul need to be by that bridge at the same time, because maybe some cards require 2 characters. So that's a cool idea. I hadn't considered that. Maybe not only are we talking about cards where you are doing things, but maybe we're talking about cards where you have to control multiple characters. I think as a 1 to 4 player game, we will have to make a decision about whether you always control 4 characters or whether it's 2 for 2 player, 3 for 3 player, and 4 for 4 player. That's something that we don't need to worry about yet, but I think that you can probably assume that in a solo game, you're going to have to control 2 just to have those interesting dynamics. So I think that having cards that require 2 people to be somewhere is a fantastic idea. Whoa, the chat's just strolled up, sorry. Banana to trip Vesh up promo card confirmed. I think so. 1 rotten banana, please. Yeah, I think that if this becomes a Kickstarter game, then that could definitely be a fun stretch goal. On that note, it would be an interesting push and pull wearing out his army stamina versus how much reinforcements prep the city can have reaching there early. Yeah, I think that that's a really cool idea. Frank, you need to check out Looney Pyramids if you haven't yet. I am familiar with Looney Pyramids, but I've not really used it or played around with it very much. So it's something that I should probably get at some point and take a look at. Just trying to think about how scouting improves your odds beyond moving along a scouting track. Yeah, I think that I like the idea of researching. I like the idea of Vesh's deck perhaps he's doing 3 cards per turn. Perhaps we know that there are 3 cards that are laid out each turn, so at the start of each round, perhaps these 3 cards are placed down, and then perhaps they, at the end of the round, they're all going to get flipped, and then that's going to make the decision of what he does. And maybe as players, we can look. So maybe this card here is representative of what path he's going to take. Is he going to take path A, path B, or path C? Perhaps this card here is representative of how far he's going to move. Is he going to move 1, 2, 3, or 4? Perhaps this card here represents either a special he's going to do. Maybe he could move twice. Maybe he's going to do an ability to slow us down, or maybe he's going to do something else. And what's really interesting then is we have to choose. So we were saying about this option earlier of, do we go to this one, or do we do both? Now, if we look at the path card, we're going to know which one he's going to, but we might not know if he's going to make it there without looking at the distance card. So perhaps we'll look at the distance card, because then that will tell us how far he's going to reach. Or perhaps we look at the special because we want to know what he's going to do to us. Maybe it's a penalty each round we have. Maybe, he does a chemical thing where everyone in the area has -1 to their movement each turn or something. So maybe each round with scouting, we get to flip one of these cards, and that would then start to give us, I really like this idea. This is a really cool idea. Thank you for talking about scouting and stuff. I think that's a really cool, interesting idea of, if he's got 3 cards and 2 of them are path and distance, the other one is special or it's extra movement, then that gives us a really cool way of, well, we're not going to look at all 3 of them probably, because that's going to be a huge cost to us to do that. But perhaps we want to look at one of them. Perhaps we do need to look at 2 of them this time. Perhaps we're going to gamble it each round and we're not going to care. But again, that allows us to make some really interesting decisions. Suddenly we've got some information that we can gain. And the question becomes, is it better for us to destroy this bridge and destroy this bridge? Or are we better to spend some of our resource, our turn, to discover where he's going to go? Now, if we do that, we no longer have the resource to do both of these things, but we know which one we do need to do. So that's a really cool little idea. I really like that kind of system, and that's a really cool good thing that's coming out of this. And this is why I love doing this stream. This is, I was expecting us to be making more stuff right now, but actually just talking through some of these concepts and some of these ideas is a really good, fun idea. So, where are we at? If you just trying to think about how Scout, yes. So if you want different paths, shortcuts, branches, maybe there's a board and it has tiles that overlays changes throughout the game. Yeah, I think that kind of stuff is really interesting. I think that I'm definitely seeing this as a hexagon-based board as opposed to like a racetrack. If you think of a lot of racing games, they're very much that you have a racetrack and it's going to be kind of like this, and you're going to be just moving along lines. Whilst I think that we want to be much more focused on, here is a terrain area and this is, it's full of hexagons. I like to draw circles. I'm not going to fill the whole thing up, but you kind of get the idea. And then as we're progressing along this track, we're not just going in a straight line, but we might be kind of doing this and going all over the place just to try and get there. And what that means is this distance from the start to the end, maybe it doesn't need to be 50 spaces, maybe it's only going to be 30 spaces, but the likelihood of us actually going in that straight line is so low. I think that what's cool about this kind of stuff is it looks nice on a table. Again, we need to think about the presence of how the board's going to look, just because it's going to be the main visual part of this game. You do have 17 copies of Scrabble. That is absolutely incredible. I have 1 copy of Scrabble. Yeah, I do. I can see my copy of Scrabble. So I do have 1 copy of Scrabble. I've never played it. I bought it because I was running a convention and I felt like it would be a good thing to have. I don't consider English as my native language. Type in my native language. Well, I have English as my native language and I'm appalling at it. So I'm going to be jealous of anyone who's good at Scrabble. With diverging paths, maybe movement cards affect groups of penguins, split up all your penguins, you need to spend a lot. Yeah, I think that the idea of, you can move like one paint, again, if we talk about the cost, some cards cost 1, some cards cost 3. You can have a free cost card that allows you to move one thing 4 spaces. You can have 1 cost cards that allow you to move one thing 1 space, but then you can play multiple of those cards, and that allows you to move 2 or 3 different things 1 space. I think that those are some really interesting different dynamics that we can be exploring as well. So Magic Maze does it really well, people having more actions in the lower player counts. Yeah, I agree, Luke. I think that Magic Maze, whilst it's a very simple, basic game, and it is real-time, which I want to avoid, I think that there's some really cool stuff that exists in that game. So maybe we've got 4 primary actions. Maybe the concept of destroying a bridge, laying a trap, going to a shop, or doing this, maybe those are our 4 actions. And in a 4-player game, every player has one of those actions. Perhaps in a 2-player game, everyone's got 2 of those actions. Now, actually, that's a really cool idea, because straight away, that starts to give players roles, So if my role is I can always destroy bridges, we need to make sure that's happening. If this player's role is that they can only ever buy stuff, they're the only one that can buy stuff, then obviously we need to make sure that whatever characters are near shops, they've got the ability to go and do those purchases. And I think that those bonuses, maybe they aren't costing, maybe they don't cost energy. Maybe it's just the fact that that player has to be having that turn at that time in order to do it. So I like the free card thing, reminds me of the free seashells. You can still use the fate deck for this, have the suit of the card be a factor, and as players have cards change the suit number, like you were saying within the Mystic Veil. Yeah, completely. Hex board, I was thinking Hex 2, kind of Hero Escape build-up tiles, feel to it even. Not so much in the 3-dimensional side of it. I think that would be, if I'm thinking of the right game, but yeah, no, completely in the kind of the way the board is laid out and stuff, so on. Have you played El Dorado, Frank? That's beautifully simple deck building race game. Yeah, completely. So El Dorado is one of the games that has inspired me to want to do this. I absolutely love it. I think it's a really cool game, and that does bring me on to game number 4 that we're going to be taking some inspiration from. So something that we've not talked about yet, and this is one of the key things that has been in the back of my mind and I've been dying to tell you guys, is so far we have talked about the simplicity of moving along a track and moving towards the end. One of the things that El Dorado does, which is so fantastic in my eyes, is it introduces the concept of terrains. And now to move across certain terrains, you need to have certain things. If you want to move across water, this isn't how they do it, but thematically, if you want to move across water, you need to have a boat. If you want to climb over cliffs, you need to have climbing equipment. If you want to just move across grass, then you can do that. So now I want to introduce the concept to us that we're going to have terrain types on our tiles. So this is where it's interesting, because Vesh and his armies, they've got boats, so they can go over that lake, whilst we're going to have to go round it. So perhaps, if this again is our track, and there's a giant lake over here, Vesh is quite quickly just going to go straight across here and get to the end. But for us, our decision now is we have to go up here and take a huge detour to get to him. Or we can spend the time and the resources to get the ability to build a boat or to get something. Maybe we have to go over here to find the guy who's going to give us the boat, because we know this land. We know that over there is Dave. Dave is the most famous boat builder in all of the Occult territories. And suddenly we're going to go over here. We're going to buy our boat, and then we're going to be able to come over. It's going to take us a bit of extra planning, and we've got to plan in advance. And that's a huge thing for me. I love the idea of planning in advance and making sure that we're thinking about what's down the line. So I think that that's one of the things I really want to think about as well. And how I'm kind of seeing it at the moment is we've talked about cards. We've talked about the idea of cards having 2 options. And I like the idea that we've got a number at the top, and this is a move value. So this is how far you can move on this card. If I play this card, I can move 2 spaces. I can move any piece 2 spaces. But let's say that over here, we now have a picture of a tree. So now I've got 2 choices. I can play this card to move 2 spaces. Let's say that on normal grass, I can just move. Let's say on, the lake, we need a boat. Let's say through trees, you need to have something special. And that's what this is. But I have to choose one of these two options. So now perhaps I've got my second card, and perhaps on my second card I've got a 2, and on my second card perhaps, I don't know, let's say we've got some boulders or something. This is a terrible picture of a boulder. So now when I've got my turn, I can play these two cards and I can play them together. So I could play the 2 off this card and the 2 off this card, and that allows me to move 4 spaces on a straight track. However, I could play the 2 on this card, and then I could play the boulder on this card, and that allows me to move 2 through a boulder type terrain. Or perhaps on this card, I could play the tree, and on this card the 2, and that allows me to move 2 spaces through forests. So I love this dynamic of having this hand of cards, and you've got some halves that are allowing you to build through a territory type. You've got some cards that are allowing you to build through a numerical type, and I've just realized something, so bear with me 1 second. But no, that is exactly the kind of thing that I think is really, really interesting in my eyes. So let's see what else. Sorry, I do apologize. I just wanted to check that that was going through okay. So what else have we got going on? Would it be cool to maybe have some biomes stuff like the different layouts of City of Kings tile setup? Yeah, completely. Different hexes shuffled, placed in different areas of the path. Completely. I think that building up the board as we go is a really, really key important part of this. Have you considered building the racing grid into cards? Might be interesting to be able to easily shuffle up the board. I think so. I'm in two minds about cards or tiles at this point. I quite like having big hexagonal pieces just because they are more visually interesting, but at the same time, I do think that they have obviously a production cost, and there's the pros and cons to that. But either way, I like the idea of a dynamic setup. I think that you could have starting tiles and you could have end tiles. So for example, the lake could be an obstacle. Perhaps there are several different types of obstacles, and we're only going to get one obstacle, and it's going to be randomly in the second half of the board. Maybe we're going to get 2 different obstacles in that second half. Maybe each of the second half tiles is an obstacle. Perhaps the first half of the board is going to be ways to get past those obstacles. So you're going to then see, we've got, okay, here we do have a boat, so we could do the lake. We have this over here. And then you've got the dynamics of working out the route you want to take. Is the boat going to be first? Is this bridge destroying person going to be second? I don't know. But I think those are really interesting things that we should be thinking about as well. Was meaning to say that a move 2 could move all the penguins on 1 space by 2. Yeah, I think that having some cards that allow you to move every penguin as well is another way of being interesting. And that can be pros and cons, right? Because if you've got 4 penguins and you can move them all 2 spaces, that's great, because 1 card is allowing you to move 8 spaces as a total. And we've talked about 5 spaces per turn, so that's a super powerful card. But the negative of that is if we're all trying to align the penguins to certain positions, if we're trying to get these 2 penguins over here to this obstacle, then that's going to be something that's really challenging if you're moving everything 2 spaces. So there's some really good pros and cons to what we could be doing with that. That is where I was thinking the Heroescape tiles would play into it, or sabotage the boats. Yeah, we talked about multi-purpose cards. What if all the cards in the game are hex-shaped and each have the ability to be used as an action or to be laid on the board? You can't move if you don't build the board. That's a really interesting idea. I think that one of the challenges I find with that is it's hard to hold a hand of hexes. So with cards, we're very used to being able to kind of, hold out some cards. We're used to being able to lap them over and hold them like this. If you've got a few kind of small hexagon pieces, it's quite difficult. I think that our hexagons, me drawing these on here isn't going to really help, but they're going to be kind of like an inch in diameter, or an inch across, 2.5, 3 centimeters across. They're not going to be big things, because if we're going to be moving 50 spaces, then we need to have maybe 150 spaces to move through, or 100 spaces to move through. And if we're going to have 100 hexagons, then the idea of them being too big, it's going to take up too much space. So that's one of the challenges. I think is a really cool idea, though. It's something that certainly could be explorable, and maybe, if not all of them, maybe there are some tiles that can be placed on the board. So maybe you've got some cards that allow you to put things onto the board in that way. So where are we? This is where I was thinking Heroescape. We just did that. Personally, I'm not a super fan of map tiles. They can look random, messy. Eldorado has board sections rather than individual hexes. Yeah, so I don't think that the board, it definitely wouldn't be like a one hex at a time. If we're having 100 plus hexes, I think that it would be groups of hexagons. I don't know what the grouping of them would be yet, but I certainly think it would be more than that. I'm not a fan of like hexes where each one is just a flat terrain, and I like to be able to draw a piece of artwork across multiple tiles. Whilst we've talked about terrain types, I don't want this to get too visually like ugly and just saying, okay, this one's brown because of this and this one's blue because of this. I think it's got to be a really interesting piece of art at the same time, because the visual side of this is just as important. You can't move if you don't build the board. Personally, not a super fan of map tiles. I was imagining 2 to 3 inch hexes. Yeah, I think that they would certainly be a lot smaller than that just to be able to keep building this up. So what I want to do is, I'm spending a lot of time going through the chat, which is fantastic. I think that we want to just try and put one last thing together. So I've shown you all of the component pieces that I kind of keep with me. The last thing that I kind of always have with me is a set of hexagon sheets. These are just something that I have that I just keep piles of so I can always use them. So we're talking about having, a 50 hexagon kind of path. And I think that this is a really good starting point, because what this does is it allows you to block them off. What I typically do is I'll get some tokens, whether they are coins, I might get scissors, but early on I get some tokens and I'll play around. So what I might start doing is just putting some of these onto here and suddenly start creating some sort of interesting shape. We never quite know what we want. We never quite know how interesting things are going to get. So perhaps these aren't actually going to exist in the game. We could get a pair of scissors and cut these off, but we're making up an arbitrary shape. We've got no idea how we want it to look. We don't know whether we want to have 3 hexes or 2 hexes. We don't know if we want it to be big or small. So what I generally would do is build something up like this and then start playing around with it. At this point, we've got a somewhat interesting shape. It's fairly basic, this is a very straight line. I don't think that we want something that's quite so straight, and maybe we end up just doing something like this, and then say, okay, these ones would be cut off, these would be cut off, and these ones actually would be some mountain spaces on them. And for that purpose, what I would probably do is just take some different tokens and just put them on there just to show me that they're representative of something else. Because now we've got a really basic board, it's not going to look great, it's not going to be right, but it's something we can very easily change around. Now we can have our starting point for Vesh. Maybe with him, he doesn't start for the first 1 or 2 rounds. Maybe he doesn't start till round 3. We've got our starting points for us, and we're at a point where we can start moving across a board. We're at a point where we can start drawing up some cards and thinking about some of the stuff we can do. But we're also at a point where we should probably start thinking about wrapping up the stream, because we have been going for just over an hour and a half, and I don't want to be doing too longer episodes in one episode. I think that it's really important to do a part 2 and to come back. And in part 2, what I want to do is I want to actually build this board up. I want to draw some cards out, and I want us to actually play the game. And this game would literally, the starting point of it would be, we're going to move across the board. I want to get to a point where we're moving across the board, and maybe we've got a deck of cards that represent how Vesh moves in some way. And I think that's a really good goal for part 2. By the time we do part 2, I'll probably forget, but I'm going to do this at the same time next week. So if you think an hour and a half ago, in exactly 7 days' time, that's when we're going to go live. But equally, you can follow along on Twitch, and that will allow you to get notified when we're going live, or follow me on Twitter or Facebook to get some notifications. I think that this has been a really interesting exercise. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this. I know that we haven't got too far in terms of actually making the game, but I feel like just this brainstorming and talking it through has been really exciting. I want to keep going and keep working on this, but I think that this has really worked out as a fantastic way of just playing through. So guys, thank you so much for joining, and thank you. I hope that this has been of value to some of you. I hope that you kind of share it with your friends and let them know next time, because I'd like to get more people involved. And who knows, maybe next year this will be a game that I release on Kickstarter. I have every ambition for us to make this game into something great, because if we can do that, this would be such an incredible journey, wouldn't it? Like day one of the game, you and me, like just going through this and talking it through and seeing where we can get through. It might be hard to put all of your names as designers, but we will definitely find a way to do that. So I'm just going to catch up on the chat. I don't want to kill it off just yet, but we'll see. Rather than still having to move them separately, that's where it's coming. Here's good. Yes, personally, yes. So rather than like punched out 5 hex groups, for example, you're thinking of a large board of many hexes. I'm thinking that it would probably, so you've got the basics. I'm just having a look. So you've got kind of 1 hex in the middle, and then you've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 around. So you've got 7. Why did I have to count that? So 7 hexes is that kind of standard shape. Now, I'm not a fan of using that standard shape. I like the idea of exploring it. So recently I've been doing a lot of game design where I've been using kind of 10 to 12 hexes in a piece. And I think that that's quite fun, because then maybe you have 3 on the easy side, 3 on the hard side, and that gives you, 6 tiles with 12 on each. That'd be 72. So maybe we'd be looking at having 7 or 8 tiles, or maybe we'd be looking at having 14 or 16 hexes. I think the important thing is to come up with a pattern that gives you the ability to have some really interesting shaping to it, because you want it to not just feel like a flat, straight line. So, guys, thank you so much. I really am glad that you've come by. I really hope you've enjoyed it. This has been a really interesting experience for me too. I've certainly enjoyed it. You guys have been absolutely fantastic. So I hope that you continue to watch stuff on Twitch. There are plenty of other people using Twitch. These days, there are more and more people doing that. And in fact, I can see that No Pun Included are actually live at the moment. So what I think I'll do is, rather than just killing this off, I'm going to do a raid, which means I'm going to move us over to there. If you need to go, get going. If you don't need to go, then stick around. We'll move over and we'll start watching those guys as they wrap up the end of their stream as well. I've never done this before. Let's see what happens. Have they just gone offline? Oh no, that's terrible timing. So yeah, they have. So I think instead we will probably wrap it up because they've just gone off. So never mind. Guys, thank you so much. Have a fantastic afternoon. Have a good evening or wherever you are. And until next time, I'll see you soon.